And ultimately, the meaning of life for me is Eoghan and Ruairi. You know, they made me a mum, and that can never be taken away. I've been asked, do I regret meeting Sanj? No, because I had two beautiful boys because I met him. So I can't regret that. I can't, as I say, whitewash him out of my life, because he was a big part of my life. So, you know, the biggest part of my life and the biggest meaning in my life now is Eoghan and Ruairi. And they are part of my family.
Absolutely. And your book is called Everything.
It is indeed.
Because I assume it's because they're your everything.
They were and are my everything, and everything was taken away from me, and I will never get everything back again. But I'll keep trying to get close to that in whatever way I can.
Kathleen, you have been an amazing guest, and thank you so very much for giving me the time. Kathleen, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Laura.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad to have you. You just came from a chat with Simon Harris. What were you trying to get out of him?
So there was a study commissioned, a piece of research commissioned 4 years ago on familicide and domestic homicide reviews. So it was just discussing that report. It's due to be published hopefully by the end of the month. And I have to say, in fairness to him, he was very receptive to the discussion, and is very keen to make sure that the report is published. Very aware that, you know, there's an awful lot of recommendations in that. Some of them will be easy to implement, some will be more difficult, and some may never be possible. But he's certainly open to it, which I do appreciate.
And are these recommendations to do with how we as a society approach domestic violence, or approach familicide, or how is it?
And domestic homicide.
Okay.
The discussion today really was actually going, while we want to prevent this, and we absolutely do want to prevent homicide and domestic homicide in particular, in this particular instance, it's probably not going to happen. The reality is, as a society, there's only a limit to what we can prevent. You know, human nature will be as it is. So my point is always, when things happen, how can the victim and their families be supported? And that was the main part of our discussion, in fairness. I've always said, quite bizarrely, I'm quite lucky. I'm one of the luckier ones, believe it or not, in how the process treated me after. From that very first phone call to the guards, when I realised that Sanj had taken the boys, to today, to be honest. You know, I've been treated very fairly, treated very well. I am quite vocal, so I will, you know, put my hand up and say, I need this, or I want that, or, you know, I know, if you like, where to go to get answers, if I don't have them readily. But that shouldn't be a lottery. It shouldn't be, it was great down in Ballinkillen, Bagnallstown, Carlow, but if you're in Kerry or over in Galway or Sligo or Dublin, that you don't get exactly the same support.
Okay.
So that was the most part of our discussion today. And actually, I know he's met with a number of families, in fairness, that were involved in the study and in submitting to the study. And he himself, he said, you know, he's learned an awful lot, even in the last week. You know, it's one thing to read a study, but it's very different when you actually sit down with those that have been impacted and affected. So it was, I have to say, a very positive meeting, and I feel very, you know, and I've met with Helen McEntee in the past, and I sound like I'm name dropping on the politicians now, but
these are the people that you need to be talking to.
Yeah.
To get stuff done, yeah?
That's where change will happen.
Yeah.
You know, I believe it is when the likes of myself and other families that have been affected speak out, and then when the politicians listen, which they do, in fairness, that actually change will happen.
So Kathleen, let's go back to why you are sitting here today and why we all know you and know your name. Can you tell me a little bit about the lead up to how your sons were killed?
So approximately 10 days beforehand, I discovered that my now ex-husband, Eoghan and Ruairi's dad, had been embezzling money from our local community centre. He was the treasurer on the committee. He's a background in banking, so that made sense. He was a stay-at-home dad, so he had a little more time, particularly as the two boys were now in school. So when he took on the role as treasurer, I got it. It made sense. It never ever occurred to me that he would do something illegal or that he would steal from the community. So when I did discover that, it was a real shock. It just wasn't the person that I thought him to be at all. But we were working through that, I thought.
Did he come to you and tell you about it?
No, okay. No. So our local parish priest came to my mum and dad, actually, because it was now coming out into the open. It was known, I think, within certain circles or suspected and then known for maybe a couple of weeks. He came to mum and dad. My mum called me. Sanj happened to be collecting Eoghan actually from a golf lesson. This was in summer holidays, so Eoghan was doing. He had just joined the local golf course in Burris.
How old was he?
He was 10. Oh. So his 10th birthday present was membership of the golf course, and so he was just. He was having lessons. He was doing a golf camp, so was absolutely thrilled with himself and loving it. So Sanj had gone down to pick him up, and my mum had phoned me to go over. I thought there was something wrong with my dad, but I went over and I had Ruairi with me, and she sat me down and told me that the priest had been, and that Sanj was suspected of taking money from the local community centre. So I made some calls. I was shocked, but I made some calls just to confirm, to see what the story was, what was going on. It was confirmed, and then I phoned Sanj. I may have phoned him first. I'm not quite sure. I can't quite remember the sequence. But and as soon as I phoned him, he realised that it had come out. Mm. I presume he suspected it was going to. I don't think I ever actually asked him that question as such, but so he basically asked a friend to then collect Eoghan from after the golf camp, or to take him home, and he disappeared for the afternoon. And I remember at the time, he'd tell me he was coming back home, and then disappear, or he wouldn't arrive home, and I'd phone him again, and he said, "No, I've just been sitting thinking," or he didn't tell me exactly where he'd gone to or where he was, but he was delaying getting home. And I suppose a little part of me went, could he do something silly? Was he going to disappear? Was he going to take his own life? So I asked him not to do anything silly, to just come home and we would deal with it. So he did. He arrived home, and in, I suppose, the 10 days between that Wednesday and the Sunday when he took the boys, things were tense. They weren't easy. We had a lot of discussions about it. How are we going to pay this money back? We were lucky because at that time, house prices, there was a recession going on, but we would have had equity in our house, so we would have either remortgaged if we'd had to, or sell if we'd had to sell. That's what we would have done, what
did he spend the money on?
He was gambling. He was trading stocks and shares.
Okay.
Which was effectively gambling.
Yeah.
Day trading. It was hidden in the open, is how I always describe it, because he'd be sat on his computer, doing his trading, if you like, and whatever that was, I could, anytime I could have stood over him watching the screen what he was doing, but I didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
And I never took it seriously. It was something he had done for years, so I never really took it seriously. If he'd made a fortune and I could have given up work, then I might have been able to to think of it as something. But to me, it was a hobby. It was just something that he did.
Okay.
So, you know, as I say, things were tense. It was, but, you know, as the days went on, it kind of softened a little bit. And I would have said for the week before he took the boys, there was a calmness about him. We had gone away the weekend before on a camping trip that had been planned from before, and I didn't want to let the boys down. I wanted things to be as normal as possible for them. So we did that weekend, and we came back, and there was just a calmness. I now look at that, and I look at it as he had made a decision in his mind as to what he was going to do, and had probably decided he wasn't going to be around to have to deal with anything into the future. So, you know, I now look back on that and think, at the time I thought it was relief. I thought he was relieved. Everything was now out in the open, and we were getting on with it, and I hadn't kicked him out of the family home. He was still there, and, you know, we would tackle this. I think for him, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going to have to deal with this going forward. He may not have known when he was going to do what he did, but I think he had made the decision he was going to do it.
Okay.
I subsequently found out that this was a thought he'd had in his mind from about 1.5 years previously. I found an email that he had written, which was a suicide note, and in it he had indicated that he was going to take me and the boys and himself. So
this was on an email to himself?
To himself, yeah. So it was one of those. So after when the guards were involved, our laptop and computer were taken away. So I had no access to photographs of the boys. I had some, but very few. Everything was on the computer, because in fairness to Sanj, he was quite organised. So everything was in folders. But that was all gone. And I did know that we would have emailed photographs of the boys over to their grandparents. And when Owen was born, Sanj would have created an email account for him. You know, the sort of the grandchild thing where, you know, it was Owen was sending emails to his grandparents, sort of a thing,
lovely,
from his own email account.
Yeah.
And so I went into that to look for photographs. And when I was in, I'm just browsing through all of the folders. And in the sent folder, there was one that was an email that had been sent to Sanj himself, to his own email account. And it was an email that he had written. So he'd written it from Owen's email account and sent it to himself. It's just bizarre, but it would have been about 1.5 years previous. And yeah, so he wanted to kill me as well. So whatever was going on had been going on for a long time.
And did he say in the suicide note why he was going to kill you? Did he?
No.
Okay.
No. He just, bizarrely, in this note, he talked about how to trade, how to make money. And then I think his words were something like, you know, forget about me, but raise a glass to Kathleen and the boys and remember them. I'm not quoting directly now, but it was somewhere along those lines. And I remember at the time when I found it would have been about a month after the boys were killed, and what did I do with it? So I ended up sending a copy of it to the guards through my guard liaison officer, and then I sent another copy to the Central Mental Hospital where Sanj actually was at the time, because I just did not know what to do with this, you know. And a friend of his did go to visit him after. A couple of friends did actually, and in fairness to them, they were very good. They checked with me first, was I happy for that? And I was, because at the time I wondered about him. I was worried about him. You know, he was still my husband. And bizarrely, even though he was the person that had done all of this, you know, I still cared about him. I still worried about him.
Is it like you can't switch off your emotions just because?
No.
Were you worried that he was mentally unwell?
Yeah, okay. You know, that would have made more sense at the time. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, I absolutely know he wasn't. But at the time, I just didn't know. So when Gary went to visit him,
and as in, he wasn't mentally unwell. Yeah. He was in sound mind.
He was of sound mind completely. There was no history of mental illness at all, and certainly in the assessments that they've done since, there was nothing.
Okay.
But right then, you would have questioned it, and I would have. It almost would have been easier if he were mentally unwell, because it would have been a diagnosis. It would have been a reason. It would have, but looking back on it now, because I know he wasn't, I'm so glad that there was no question of that. That when he was assessed, it was very obvious that while, yes, there was a mild depression of sorts, and there was a risk of suicide because of what he had done and because of his situation in here and now, he was at risk of suicide.
And he didn't try and plead for insanity, because sometimes people do, so that they don't have to go to jail. But he didn't at all.
He didn't at all. Okay. Which was, I suppose, the only. It's about the only time that I give him any slack, if you like, or any credit at all, is that he did plead guilty. But I also look at that now and I go, he was guilty. So by pleading guilty, he didn't have to face any questioning. He didn't have to face what he had done. It was simply read into court on the day. He was asked, was he guilty or not guilty? He said guilty. And that was pretty much it.
Okay.
So he didn't actually have to face what he did. So, there's a relief in that, but there's also a frustration that he never had to confront what he did. And I even 10 years down the line, I don't think he has done. He's quite protected, really, in prison.
Have you had any dealings with him since?
No, none.
Okay.
None. And I don't want to.
Did he ever try and reach out to you?
Yeah, he wrote to me. He asked, could he write to me in the very early days when he was still in the Central Mental Hospital. And I agreed initially because I thought, well, maybe it'll give me some insight into what he's done. But I think I got about 3 letters over a 2-week period, and I went, no, stop. I can't be doing this, because they were quite frustrating insofar as there was no real remorse in them. There was certainly no explanation in any way. And it was almost bizarrely like love letters, so he was quoting song lyrics to me. He wasn't that romantic when things were normal between us. So to be suddenly getting this kind of sort of response from him or interaction was just bizarre, and I just wasn't. I couldn't handle it. So I went, no, stop, no more. But that connection is difficult because, I've just lost the 2 most precious beings in my life, and to a certain extent 3 when you include him. He was my husband. I loved him, and right up until only just before, we were a normal, happy family.
And I suppose people would ask that question. Was there any signs that he was not going to do this? Because obviously, like what kind of sign would that be? But you had a normal relationship, a normal marriage or whatever. Like, what's a normal marriage, Kathleen?
And that's exactly, we had our ups and downs.
Like everyone.
Yeah, the decision for him to be a stay-at-home dad was very much a decision we made together. The decision to move down to Ballinkillen, which is where I'm from, to build, my dad gave us a site, and we were able to build, a gorgeous family home there. There were opportunities that we were able to take up, and there were decisions that we made together, and they were the right decision at the time, and I look back on it now, absolutely, and I go, I wish I'd never agreed to him being the stay-at-home dad, because maybe if he had a job and was going out to work, he wouldn't have had time to get involved in the trading. And do I call it trading? Do I call it gambling? It's a difficult one, because I think it's a gambler's mindset in what he was doing. Now, when I look back on it, I suppose I saw it as little more than a hobby at the time. And And I never questioned him. I didn't have reason to question him, So we had the normal ups and downs, we weren't we certainly weren't the Waltons or the Brady Bunch.
But who the hell is?
Exactly, So it was, but yeah, no, it was good. And I remember actually that summer, because I'd taken parental leave that summer. So I was off for about 5 weeks, and we were now only about halfway through, before I found out about the embezzlement, we were only two and a bit weeks through. And I remember waking up on a Monday morning going, I've just had 2 weeks of leave and I've still got another 3 and a bit ahead of me. Wow, this is fantastic. And having the time with the boys was just lovely.
Yeah.
It was easy and it was relaxed. And then suddenly, everything. And I thought the worst had happened with the embezzlement. I could never, ever have envisaged where we ended up.
And he took the boys bowling that night, didn't he?
Yeah, well, that's what he said he was doing.
Okay.
He was supposed to take them bowling, and again, it was a Sunday. It was a summer holidays. We were neither of us were having to get up to work the next day. The most that was going to happen was Eoghan was supposed to be going to golf, and so there wasn't anything unusual in that. He was probably being a little bit more careful around me, if you like, and a little bit more, he was taking the boys a bit more, or he was giving me time to myself. And, he was trying to make up for what he had done to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And so that Sunday, he'd brought me a cup of coffee in bed in the morning, which was a usual, it wasn't unusual for him to do that at all. We kind of talked about just the kids and various things, but nothing, and nothing sort of, things were cool between us still.
Yeah.
But he said he was going to take the boys bowling. I was going off for a walk with a friend. It wasn't, there was no question of me going with them, but it wasn't that he didn't actively go out of his way to not bring me, if that makes sense. So it was just normal. There was nothing to be suspicious of. The only thing that I ever questioned when I look back on it was he had walked out. The boys had gone up to my brother's to drop something off, and he was to collect them up there. So he'd walked out to get in the car, said his goodbyes. He came back in to get the camera. So he literally walked in, picked up the camera and left again. And that now is unusual. But at the time, I don't think I even questioned it. It was just, oh, okay. It wasn't you look back in hindsight and think, there was lots of things I should have seen. But you're not looking for them at the time. It's, again, the way things were back then, all he was doing was spending time with the boys. And given that I had spoken to him sort of the previous week about, having to go out to find work and possibly having to go back to the UK for work because I didn't know whether he'd get anything in Ireland. He hadn't worked for the previous 10 years because he was, with the boys. So there was, I suppose, a number of reasons that he might have wanted to take photographs of himself with the boys.
Okay.
And...
Did he take photographs of himself with the boys with that camera?
What he did, yes, he did, in the car. So he literally took a selfie, if you like, of himself and then the two boys sitting in the back. Now, they're not photos that I have kept.
I can imagine.
But they were available to me if I wanted them from the guards, but because they took the camera at the time as well.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, why? That seems quite bizarre in a way. He would have written a number of letters after he had killed the boys, but before he intended killing himself. So, one of them was to me, where he invited me to join them. In other words, to take my own life. The implication, to me, of what he was saying there was, almost if I didn't love the boys as much as he did, was how I interpreted that. He also wrote to the boys, and he used the words, "Mummy is getting rid of me," in the letter that he wrote to Eoghan and Ruairi, which again is quite manipulative, because if he had intended to have killed himself, to be gone himself, you know, he knew Eoghan and Ruairi were already dead. So who was going to read that letter? Only me, in reality. So again, there was a certain element of blame, you know, and blaming me.
Yeah.
Because I wanted him to, and I wasn't getting rid of him, but I did want him to look for a job, because we now had a lot of money to have to pay back, and how that was going to happen. So, so quite manipulative, I would see now, in a way that I didn't see at the time. You know?
And when you say manipulative like that, was he manipulative in the marriage? When you look back,
when you look back, and it's hard. There was a certain amount of it, yes, but I don't know that he knew he was doing it. I don't know that it was necessarily something that was conscious. And maybe goes a little bit to what we spoke about sort of earlier, you know, in regards to the cultural differences, you know.
Yeah.
You know, was there something? And I think a lot of this was shame. He had been found out as being, you know, as being a thief, basically, as a criminal, as a liar, you know, so was that shame because of his Indian origin, or just as a male, you know?
So,
or
and he wasn't born in India. He was born in Northern Ireland, and then went to the UK at the age of 4.
Yeah.
So he was what?
He was
Northern
Western.
Irish. He was Western, but brought up in an Indian culture.
Yeah.
So I've been to India, as I told you, loads of times, and it's quite a paternalistic society, and women can't walk the streets at night by themselves without a man, and it's very much male orientated. Yeah. So did you experience that in your relationship with him, or his relationship with his own parents? Or
I wouldn't have said I did, you see. That's the thing. I didn't necessarily see Sanj as Indian when we first met. And in fact, I would have...
As opposed to him looking very Indian.
Yeah, and that's it. You know, and even then, you know, in those early days, he started to look more Indian as he got older. But when I first met him, he was 25, 26, and he looked almost Mediterranean. So he was dark eyes, dark hair. I thought very handsome, and he was British. You know, he talked about Northern Ireland because he would have spent a lot of time coming over to visit family over here. So, you know, there was a lot of things that we had in common in that way that we could talk about. His upbringing, I would have felt, was very similar to my own, you know, with family values, the sort of, albeit sort of different religion. So
he was Hindu, was he?
He was Hindu, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm Catholic.
Okay.
But you know, the Hindu religion is a very gentle sort of religion, I think, in lots of ways, and very spiritual. And, you know, so it wasn't a million miles from how I was brought up. And certainly the family side of things, you know, he would have been very close to his cousins, as I was, or am. He would have been quite close, you know, the whole... social aspect of family life in that way. So he would have socialised with aunts and uncles and cousins, and his grandparents lived in the home with him, and you know, as he was growing up. So not different to my own upbringing.
Yeah.
You know, I I remember at one point when I was telling my mum about him, you know, before they'd met. I think I described him as quite similar to my dad in a way.
Okay.
A very gentle soul, very easy, you know, not argumentative, not, you know, just a nice guy.
Yeah.
You know, and so I thought we had lots in common. So even when I got pregnant with Eoghan, you know, we weren't married at the time, and I joke now about how we came home from my honeymoon, or I came home from honeymoon pregnant. You know, I went pregnant, but I came home pregnant. And we, you know, even at that time, we realised, what was I, 32 at that stage, you know. So I wasn't young. We'd been together for about 5, 6, 7 years at that point. So, you know, life was, you know, we had bought a house together. We were committing to each other. But we did realise that actually we had maybe slightly old-fashioned values, and we wanted to get married. You know, so we wanted to be married when Eoghan was born. So we went off and we got married. You know, we went abroad to get married. It kind of suited both of us. And we had just bought the house. We were moving into that. So, you know, we were quite similar. We rarely argued. I wonder if that was a red flag now. The fact that we didn't really argue. You know, was that something that should I have been more concerned about that? But at the time, I just felt it meant that we were very much on the same page on things. The only time we probably argued in reality was over religion, and Eoghan and then Ruairi, you know, how influenced they were by my religion, you know, because I went to mass. You know, I wasn't overly religious, but certainly I wanted them brought up with some of the Catholic values that I had been brought up with.
Did you baptise them?
Yeah, they were both baptised. He was happy with that, but I think that was because he saw that as a party, as opposed to, you know, but that was fine. You know, he went along with it. And, you know, there's lots of mixed marriages in that way that you know, you just do that because, you know, one parent wants it more than the other, and you kind of go along with it. So, you know, it wasn't that big an issue. He was never happy when I would bring the boys, Eoghan initially, and the two of them then to mass on a Sunday morning. For some reason, that was something that really he used to. It was an argument, if you like. Not a major one, but it was just there. And
did you bring them every week?
Not every week, because I didn't go every week myself.
Okay.
But a lot of weeks.
Okay.
And the issue was, you know, I always said I had no problem taking them to mass, and I had no issue if they didn't want to come. I was never going to force them to come, but they wanted to come. You know, because my mum's a sacristan in the church, so they were meeting her. My dad would be there. To them, it was a social event.
Yeah,
you know. And I always said to Sanj, if you don't want them to come, you've got to have to do something different with them, because I'm not just going to leave them at home if they want to come with me when I go. So I said, it's up to you how you want to handle that. But again, it was, you know, it wasn't even a bad argument about it. It wasn't something that we, you know, it was there. I knew he didn't like it. He knew I wanted to go. It was just something that was not a big deal. Yeah. No. So, you know, but you do, I have to be quite careful in a way that I don't try to rewrite the past.
Yeah, because it's easy to look back and go, oh, actually he said this, therefore he must be really domineering. Yeah.
Whereas he wasn't really, you know. So it's I look at it now, and I look at things like, you know, coercive control, and you know, if you look at the sort of some of the things that come under the heading of coercive control, I go, oh yeah, tick. But again, I don't know. I didn't recognise it. I certainly wasn't uncomfortable with it at the time. And there was an odd time there would be something that he'd say, you know, something that would have happened if I hadn't been late home for work, for example. My background is nursing. He went to college, you know, he studied banking. I would have considered him the more academic of the two of us. And I was quite proud of the fact that both boys were very bright. And it's funny, at the time, I probably would have put myself down a little bit. I would have actually attributed that to Sanj more than me.
Okay.
And he would never have contradicted me on that.
Okay.
But I don't know that was an issue at the time. It wasn't an issue at the time. It was just something, you know, and it wasn't that he would have ever said I was wasn't as bright as him, or I was less academic. He certainly wouldn't have put me down in any way, but he wouldn't have built me up either.
Okay.
If that's, you know,
Yeah,
but
that makes
again,
sense.
at the time, that wasn't an issue. That was just how the dynamic was. And I was the one that would have said, you know, that the boys took after Assange. I do look at it differently now, you know, and I suppose I've learned to, you know, that I am intelligent and that I have, you know, to not put myself down in the way that I didn't do it, but it was just a subtle sort of putting myself down. It would have been me in a way more than him, but it was there. You know, so things like that. He was definitely the fun parent in comparison to me, but that was because he absolutely loved sports, and the boys definitely got that from him because I'm not sporty at all, but they loved sports. You know, so I think in any marriage, if you look back over the years and you look back, you know, you could rewrite it in a way,
or pick out bits and pieces that you thought, oh well, you know, they acted appallingly here. Yeah, of course.
But it's the same on both sides. You know, I remember speaking to the psychologist that I was seeing after the boys were killed, and almost having an argument with him because I went, I need to take some responsibility here. And he said, no, but you're not responsible. And I said, no, I know I'm not responsible for what Sanj did, but I want to take some responsibility for the relationship that I had with him, because for whatever reason, he was not able to tell me about the problems. He was not able to tell me about the gambling or the trading. He wasn't able to tell me about the embezzlement himself. Somebody else had to do it. And I needed at that time to actually have some responsibility in that. I didn't want to be passive about it. I needed to feel, you know, which is, again, it wasn't taking the blame, but it was going, okay, what was it in our relationship that was missing that meant he couldn't confide, he couldn't talk to me? Now, if you talk to many families, I know, and if you talk to many wives of gamblers or any person with an addiction,
that have affairs or something like that,
anything, they're not going to. And that was the thing, you know, he wasn't going to. Of course, he wasn't going to turn around. But I fought hard in those early days because I needed to take responsibility in a way. Yeah. Now again, time moves on, and you do look at things differently, you know. And he lived his life. I describe it as little boxes. You know, so he had boxes that he could go into with various different people in his life. You know, his friends that he was trading for, you know, his friends in Ballinkillen, his relationship with me and with my family, his relationship with Eoghan and Ruairi. And I don't even know that he was aware of any sort of manipulation in that. I don't know that he necessarily was doing things on purpose in any way, or hiding things he was hiding the trading, there's no doubt, and the money issues he was hiding. But I think he managed to convince himself on some level that it was all going to be okay, that he would never be found out.
But it was such a big part of his life. So yeah, I can see why you would feel, God, you know, he's almost living a secret life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had no idea.
No idea.
But it's like a woman in any situation, or a man in any situation where someone is doing something that they don't want to be found out about. They're not going to confide in you. You
know, so you're not going to see it if they don't want you to see it.
And did you go through that blaming yourself at this, like, if I just had done this, or if I'd acted this way? Or
Yeah. So right back to if I had... If he had gotten a job, if I had been the stay-at-home parent, or if we had both been working, or, you know, him being a stay-at-home dad made life easy for me in my job. You know, I didn't have to worry about, you know, creche pickups or drop-offs, or, you know, a child being sick. All of that was fine. I didn't have to worry about school. I didn't have to worry about, you know, the summer holidays, Christmas holidays.
Did he cook nice food?
Oh yeah, he did.
That Indian food is so good, isn't it?
His mum is a fantastic cook.
Is she?
Now, in fairness, she is, and he did definitely inherit that from her, and he enjoyed it. He enjoyed cooking. If we had visitors coming over or anybody coming over, for dinner, it was Indian food that was cooked.
You were showing off.
Yeah. Well, there was expected.
I suppose, yeah.
It was expected. And he loved doing it. The boys loved, Eoghan in particular, loved cooking with him.
Okay.
Absolutely. And they
there's so much
loved
to it, isn't it? And you can get, it's an art in and of itself, especially when you're going full on vegetarian Indian food. Yeah. It's just unreal, isn't it?
And his mum was, or is vegetarian. So we had to say when we'd go over to visit, it's okay. Just, don't worry about cooking meat for me or for the boys. Just stick with the vegetarian food, because it was gorgeous. And it was the boys, their favourite meal was dal and rice.
You're making my mouth water. I have dal on my fridge at home. Yeah.
And that's it. But it's so, I have to say it was a proud mum moment, because I go, I've got children that will eat dal, they'll eat lentils. They loved mussels. Absolutely. I mean, Eoghan would sit and devour a bowl of mussels anywhere. When Aldi first came to Bagnallstown, it was great because they used to do those mussels in a white wine sauce.
Oh yeah.
So you'd be draining off the sauce and letting him have the mussels. But I remember the first time that that I discovered that Eoghan liked Indian food was we were at a wedding up in the north, and it was a buffet. So, you went up with your plate or whatever. And I thought that was what he wanted to do, was to just the fascination of, having the food put on his plate. He was, what was he at the time? He was about 3.
Yeah.
2.5, 3. So we're walking along and I thought, okay, well, I've ordered the chips and sausages for him. He can have those and I'll eat whatever he puts onto the plate. And we sat down and I went to take the plate from him and he nearly had a conniption. He said, no. So in no uncertain terms, I got told he was eating what was on the plate. He devoured the plate and went back for more. I was like, okay, okay. And we went to an Indian restaurant a couple of weeks later and I literally had to stop him from eating because he was going to make himself sick. And from then on, Indian food, and his Eoghan in particular, his biggest goal or greatest goal was to work up to a vindaloo. Okay. He wanted to be able. Sanj couldn't eat hot food as it happens, but his brother did, and his uncles would have done. So that was Eoghan's goal, was to eat. He wanted to. How hot could he go? Ruairi was enjoying it. He did enjoy the food. He wasn't he wasn't interested in cooking at that stage, but he
loved eating.
He loved eating.
Sounds like lots of men that I know.
He liked the white chicken, which was basically chicken korma.
Okay. Yeah.
So that was, and I remember when we realised that, because we had obviously been to this restaurant at some point. They do it was in Carlow, and they did a buffet for Sunday lunch, I think it was, and so he'd had it, and then he wanted the white chicken. So we were like, what's the white chicken? So we ended up going to a different Asian restaurant, or Thai restaurant, and he was so upset. So upset because it wasn't the right one. So we worked it out then what it was that he liked, and he was 4 at the time. But himself and Eoghan would have taken it in turns to choose. So I always said we didn't have a big social life, myself and Sanj. Our social life was the boys, and I loved going out on Sundays and trying different restaurants because that's what they enjoyed as much as something else. And but when it was Ruairi's turn to choose on a Sunday, it was this restaurant in Carlow, Indian restaurant in Carlow,
for
the white chicken. And if something happened that it wasn't quite, we were going out and it was his turn, but it wasn't a Sunday, then he gave his turn to Eoghan so that the Sunday would be his. So they had this convoluted thing going. It worked. It did work. It meant there was no fights, no arguments.
They got on well.
They got on well. They did.
But they slept together too, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. So
how old were they when they died?
Eoghan was just gone 10 in the June, and Ruairi was 5.5.
Oh.
So yeah. Eoghan had decided the previous Christmas that he wanted to see could he have a year without sleeping in his own bed. Just as you do at 10. Yeah. So he was sharing the bed with Ruairi most of the time. And Ruairi had a double bed. And they were close.
Yeah.
I always said there was a quiet confidence about Eoghan. He was the oldest, the firstborn, so it takes a little bit longer for them to find their place. But a very he knew his own mind, and but it was in a quiet way. Ruairi was just confident. It was like, I'm here, I have arrived.
Something like that about the youngest. Our third is like that too. Just came and is like, I am part of this family and I'm going nowhere. The kind of way, just like that.
And I do think that was, I know with Ruairi, it was, he had Eoghan. Everything that he did in life, he was able to see his brother was there, if you like. So he either, Eoghan did it first and then Ruairi came along, or Eoghan was there to support Ruairi as he was doing it, So I remember when we took Eoghan to his first hurling training session, kind of thing. He just joined the club in Ballinkillen, and he was at the sidelines. He didn't want to go in. He didn't want to play. He didn't. It took a while. Ruairi, on the other hand, you were fighting to keep him away from the pitch when he was 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Because all he wanted was to be on the pitch and to be in playing. He didn't see himself as a little brother. He definitely saw himself as equal to Eoghan. So we couldn't have the two of them with a play date on the same day, because Ruairi would inevitably ditch whoever he had over to play to go and play with Eoghan and the older
and the bigger boys. Kathleen, it's remarkable talking to you, because you're talking with a big smile on your face, and you're talking like I talk about my boys, like as if they're still with you.
Yeah.
And because I was thinking, oh my goodness, this lady's going to come in, and I was actually feeling nervous about speaking with you. But you're not doom and gloom. And I'm just wondering, have you always been this way? Obviously, the shock and the awfulness of the first few weeks and months and years even. But how have you gotten to this place?
I'm probably naturally not doom and gloom.
Okay.
But if I'm talking about, Eoghan and Ruairi brought joy to my life and the lives of many others, even in their short lives. They made you smile. Now, they made me pull my hair out at times as well. They were not perfect. But that was normal, and that's, but they were, they were the kind of kids and that they just enjoyed life, and that was infectious in many ways. And they, they're gorgeous kids. And you give me an opportunity to talk about them, and I'm going to smile. There are tears. There are I won't say every day, because they're not every day, but there are tears. And there are many times where I have smiled through those tears because I happen to be talking about Eoghan and Ruairi. I think one of my nieces described it as happy tears, happy crying at times, because she would see me, this is in the earlier days, when she would have been younger than Ruairi even. So, she was maybe 4 or 5 at this point, and she was trying to make sense of the fact that Auntie Kathleen is crying but smiling at the same time. So it was, happy tears. And that was what it was, because if I'm talking about Eoghan and Ruairi, they are joy to me. They are loving, gorgeous kids, and I'm very, very proud of them and the impact that they had in their short lives, but the impact that they continue to have,
because of the work that you're doing now.
And I feel, that they would be proud of it. I feel that they would be, happy that I am using my voice for myself and for them. I'm very proud of the fact that that photograph of them that's on the front of the book is recognisable. That it is.
You can't miss those boys, so you can't.
And that's it. So, I am a very proud mammy. And that's going to continue, and it's hard at times. It doesn't come easy. I've had a huge amount of support over the years. I've had a fantastic psychologist that has made sense of things when very few would be able to make sense of it, of certain things. But he has helped me, I suppose, to re-engage with life.
Yeah.
And he has helped me to understand that it's okay to do that. That I don't have to live in doom and gloom. I don't have to live in the darkness. And, you know, and some of it is, you know, and I do know that some of it comes from me. It's my own resilience. And that, I believe, comes from very, very strong women within my family. You know, I look at my grandmothers, my mum, aunts. So I'm looking at all the female side of it. There's some really, really resilient, strong women. And, you know, I don't know that I would have ever considered that when I was younger or seen that. But I do now, and I very much recognise it now. And I am grateful for it, because that is definitely part of what has got you through things.
Was there ever a point where you thought, I don't want to be here, I want to join them? And
yeah, so I do think there was never a point where I would have said I was suicidal.
Okay.
But there have been many times where I've thought, I don't want to be here anymore. And that's as far as it would have gotten. I remember, I think it would have been 2 nights before the first anniversary. I got a really bad pain in my side. Didn't know what it was. I knew it couldn't be gallstones, because I'd had my gallbladder out, but it was that kind of pain. It just wasn't going away. And I called my sister-in-law. She came down to me. I was on my own in the house. And she was going to bring me into Caredoc in Carlow. But it was a Friday night, so she'd had a couple of drinks. And so she called my brother to bring us in. And my brother phoned my mum, because this was like 1 o'clock, maybe 1 o'clock in the morning. And he phoned my mum to come and look after their kids while he was bringing me in. And the first thing my mum said was, "What has she done? Oh God, what has she done?"
Yeah.
And that was the first time I realised that every time I went away, every time I was gone for a night, that she worried about me. And you kind of had I knew she worried about me, but I didn't realise to the extent that she was really worried, and others in the family were. Now, they had to trust me. And I mean, I'm an adult. I was perfectly capable of making decisions for myself at that stage. But, you know, there was a certain element where every time I'd go away, you know, will she come back? So I had to sit down with my mom and dad and actually go, no, I will never put you through what I've had to go through.
Yeah.
I will never, ever knowingly do that to you. So I won't do anything. I won't. And I've never felt suicidal. And I think most of us at some points in our lives kind of go, I just wish I could give it all up and go away, you know, and run away from it. So, and part of that is because of the support that I've gotten. You know, again, talking to the psychologist, I was able to express that. I was able to say very openly to him, you know, that, you know, I just wish I wasn't here. I don't think I'm suicidal, but I just wish I wasn't here. And we were able to explore that and to talk it through. And you needed somebody professional to do that. That wasn't connected to me, because if I say things like that, I would have been very careful and very cagey about saying that to family or friends.
Yeah.
Because it might have upset them. It might have made them worry about me. It might have made them think, you know, that I'm going to do something. And so I still see the psychologist on occasion.
How does a psychologist train to deal with someone like you? And by that I mean, people, if someone loses a child, it's awful. However, they lose them by sickness or by an accident. But you lost your children because your husband killed them. Their father killed them, and you know there was no warning. So how do these people even train to look after someone like you to get you out of that space? He
has a background in trauma counselling. Okay. So that was where his specialty was. And it was a friend of mine who's a psychotherapist herself who put me in touch with him. She recognised early on that I was going to need trauma counselling. And you know, bereavement counselling came probably about 1.5 years, 2 years down the line. It was the trauma, and you know, there would be an element of PTSD, you know, sort of going on, and that is very different. And I remember in those early days going, I didn't want to touch the loss of Eoghan and Ruairi. I didn't want to. In my head, they were still there, and they were just gone somewhere and coming back. So it was much easier for me to deal with Sanj and to talk about Sanj and to focus on him, because the feelings I had around him, I could understand, and I could talk about the fact that I still cared about him, still loved him, but I hated him, and I felt he was a monster and he was evil, but he was my husband and he was the father of my children, and so all of this could go on. Whereas the feelings around Eoghan and Ruairi and the realisation and acceptance, I always said I could accept that they were gone, but the acceptance that they were gone and never coming back took a long time to come, because no matter what, somewhere in your mind you think that they're going to come back. So, you know, I was just lucky, to be honest, to meet the right person. He, you know, when Anne put me in touch with him, she came back to me and she said, actually, now he works out of a Dr. Foley surgery in Bagnallstown. And I was like, oh, that's my GP surgery. You know, it was meant to be. You know, I've always said it was meant to be. And that's, you know, if you get do I think that it was somebody sort of, or some being somewhere making sure that I was looked after in the circumstances after it? Possibly, who knows? But, you know, there were a lot of things that happened in that respect that, you know, is it coincidence or was there a little bit of divine intervention somewhere along the line? Who knows? But he was very much the person that I needed. And he had the training, but he also had the experience behind him to know how to just let me flow. He wasn't going to fix me. And he told me that from the very, very beginning. I wasn't in there to be fixed, but he was there to support me and to help me on what he knew, but probably not to the extent that it was the journey that was ahead of me. You know, he couldn't, nobody could have foreseen where I was going to end up or how I was going to be. I didn't know in those early days how I was going to be. And you're in such a state of shock and, you know, trying to just make sense of anything was impossible. I remember so many times, you know, I suppose I summed it up by saying, don't offer me a tea or a coffee or give me a choice of a tea or a coffee. Just put a hot drink in front of me. So don't expect me to make a decision, because I don't know. I feel like for those, probably the first year and a half, I simply nodded and said yes to everything, you know, without taking anything in. And that's what shock does and trauma does. So to find the right person who could actually navigate that, there was no, and we've talked about it since, you know, he didn't know how it was going to go. He didn't know. He told me very early on that while everything that we talked about was confidential, if he thought that there was a risk to my life or that I was a risk to myself at any point, then he would have had to intervene. So I knew that from the start. And he didn't know me, so he didn't know what I was going to be like. Probably about 1.5 years afterwards, I knew I was, even with all of the therapy, I was slipping. So I went on, saw my GP, and I started on an antidepressant. That was hard because, well, basically it did what it was supposed to do, which was dulled the emotions, but it dulled all of the emotions.
Okay, yeah, because it's interesting. I've sort of heard others say that antidepressants make them feel numb.
Yeah. So it meant I couldn't cry, you know, and I see tears as very important. I have no issue with tears, with crying, and I couldn't. So it felt like you're just existing. So you're going through the motions. Now, I needed that for a period of time. Don't get me wrong. I needed to not feel, because it takes a huge amount of energy to process, that deep, heavy emotional stuff. And, so I was now at the point where I was facing the loss of Eoghan and Ruairi and the fact that they were not coming back to me. And I'd put it off as long as I could. I couldn't put it off any longer. So I needed something to help me through that. And that was fine. And they, as I say, they did what I needed them to do for a period of time. I came off them for a while, went back on them for a short period and then came off them for quite a while. My dad passed away then just at the beginning of COVID. And within sort of about the 9 months after that, I could feel myself just slipping again. And I describe it as a black hole. And that's what it's like. It's like this just dark shadow that sits on my shoulder that, just goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And I was finding it harder to kind of plow through that and get through that. And spoke to the GP again, spoke with the psychologist, and there was a kind of discussion about me going back. So I went back on the antidepressants, but maybe I needed a little bit more. Maybe now was time, and I'd always actually had the discussion with the psychologist about what was going to happen when my mum and dad go, and because they were my family now, they're my immediate family, if you like, and then unfortunately, in the October, my cousin took her own life, and I wasn't in a great place anyway. But when she did, it two things. I suppose it made me angry at her because I went, I'm fighting all the time. How can you have just given up? But I was also envious of her.
Okay.
And that scared me because she no longer had to go through things. She was out of her pain now. And it all happened when I wasn't in a great place anyway. So it in no way, was she to blame in any which way? But it was just at that point I went, right, okay, this is not where I need to be. I need to do something. And I've always wanted to be in control of myself. I never wanted a situation where, somebody was going to have to come in, or my sister was going to sit me down and say, Kathleen, you need to see, or you need to do, or, so I needed to be in control. So I spoke with my GP. He had referred me already to a psychiatrist anyway. Spoke with her and the psychologist, and the decision was that I'd go into St. Pat's for a period of time. And I went in there effectively to fall apart in a safe environment where I could be put back together again. And what I realized, I think, when I went in was I wasn't going to fall apart. That actually I could be emotional. And I think that was it wasn't until I was in there I recognized what it was that I was afraid of. I was afraid of being emotional. I was afraid that if I cracked, I literally would fall apart and I would never be able to put myself back together again, that I would just go into a dark, deep depression and not come out of it. It's all these emotions and feelings that, it's hard sometimes to put words on them. And so it's easier to describe them in colour in a way. And that's where I talk about that darkness. But, you don't always recognize, you don't recognize it necessarily in yourself. And I've always felt, I suppose, lucky when I do see it and when I do recognize it, that I need help, that I need to reach out. Say going into St. Pat's was definitely the right thing for me. It was in COVID, so there was no visitors. So I literally, it's probably the first time in a long time that I just concentrated on myself, that it was just me in there with my own thoughts and feelings, and it was absolutely what I needed at the time. The nurses in there in particular were great. The consultant, lovely, but the nurses were the ones that got you on the good days and the bad days. And a couple of them had a great ability to just push the right button at the right time.
They can even make you laugh, can't they?
Oh, totally. There were.
I have a couple of friends that are nursing. They're amazing.
And you laugh and cry, you know, and it was the realization that actually I can be emotional, that I could cry, because I was holding myself together and I didn't want to cry for fear that I'd collapse and be in a space that I couldn't get out of. So that was great. That was really good. You know, and you know, I had really, really supportive work colleagues, my boss, my manager. You know, they were very, very good at giving me that time and allowing me the space to come through that. You know, it wasn't really that I recovered from it, because it's an ongoing battle, if you like. Not a difficult one so much anymore, but it is a battle, and it is, you know, I'm always on alert for those days where things might slip a little bit. It's okay to have bad days.
Yeah.
But if that continues for a period of time, you know, I would be pretty quick about going, okay, something's, you know, I need to, what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
I say that to the psychologist regularly. At this stage, really, could he not sign me off as qualified? Because I analyse myself.
I can tell, you know so much. And so I know that your cousin took her own life and you didn't. And there could be many things that are different between the two of you as to why she did and you haven't. You've been through so much. She may or not have been. But do you have any thoughts on that, on what it takes to not?
I don't know that there is anything specific. And it's because I've never felt that I would do that.
Okay.
I've never felt, as I say, I've never felt that I would actually take my own life. I know how I could. I have thought about it but that thought is very abstract, and it's okay, well, I could do this or I could do that, but actually I'm not going to do any of it anyway. So and I've never felt like I would take my own life. I have, in the earlier days, how I would have described it was, if I had had a cancer diagnosis, would I have wanted to have treatment, or would I have just allowed, you know, nature, if you like, take its course?
Okay.
I know I would now, but in the earlier days, I may not have. I may have actually, okay, well, you know, if that's what the cards are dealt for me, then that's what I get on with, and let's not, you know, sort of fight that. I don't know if that would have been the way, but that's kind of how I try and explain it to myself in a way. And it's I do believe that we all have a resilience within us. Okay, I really, really do. And I think, you know, thankfully not everybody, or very few people are called to find it, you know, in circumstances like mine. But there are all sorts of reasons out there that people will have to find that resilience within themselves. And, you know, there's all sorts of awful scenarios that go on in life, and losses that we have to endure. And, you know, for me, losing a child is very different to any other loss. But for some people, it could be losing a parent, a sibling, you know, a partner. So, you know, all of those losses are probably in themselves equally as traumatic as you know, as my loss of Eoghan and Ruairi. And you know, I've said it. I think I mentioned it. You know, when we first met, you know, I never had to watch my children unwell. I never had to watch them go through pain, or, you know, a diagnosis of cancer, or, you know, and bizarre as it might sound, I consider myself lucky for that reason. You know, Eoghan and Ruairi were loved and loved in return, and they were in a very happy, loving home right up until those last moments. So I consider myself quite lucky in that way. You know, the pain, the trauma that they had to deal with ultimately was, I hope, very, very short in time frame. You know, I'm hopeful. I'll never know, but I'm hopeful, and I choose to believe, you know, that they slept through a lot of the initial sort of time frame when Sandra was driving. I have to hope that they weren't scared because they were with their dad. So there's a lot of comfort.
Did he
for
drug
me.
them or
no?
Okay,
no, he didn't. But it was nighttime.
Okay.
So and they were in the car, and so I'm assuming that they will have just fallen asleep in the car if he was driving. And if he went over to Mayo from home, you were talking probably, you know, sort of a 3.5, 4 hour journey anyway.
Okay, so it was that long. I didn't realise it. Okay.
Yeah. So you know, so in that way, there's a lot of ways I find comfort. There's a lot of ways I can try to make sense of things that allow me to acknowledge that there are times where I wish I wasn't here. But in saying that out loud, it doesn't mean that I am actually going to act on it or do anything about it. And, you know, not everybody is going to be like that. Not everybody will think the way that I do. Not everybody will take comfort from, you know, from faith, for example. You know, I believe I will see Eoghan and Ruairi again. I believe they're with me, you know, in some spiritual form.
Do you feel that every day?
Yeah. You know, and it's not something, I remember, you know, somebody saying to me once in an interview, you know, well, they must be at the forefront of your mind all the time. You know, every morning when you wake up, they're the first thing you think of. And I'm like, no. And actually, it can be quite, I'll use the word dangerous in a way, but it is almost dangerous to say that to a parent that has lost a child, because there's a guilt that comes with that.
Yeah.
But they're not. They weren't in life. And yes, for a long time they were, but now they're just there. They're just in my mind. They're just in my heart. They're just with me. And it does change. The relationship, if you like, that I have with them now is even different than what it was in the first couple of years after they were killed, you know, and I do call it a relationship because I do feel as though there is, you know, I'm still a mum. They're still my boys. So in the very early days, I just felt nothing. And then I felt a sense of them in the house. You know, one of the things that that did happen in the house was the light in Eoghan's room used to come on randomly. You know, the house wasn't old. It was whatever at that stage, 10 years old. So, less than that actually. So you'd assume the electrics were okay. So was it a sign? Was it them? I chose to believe it was. It didn't happen. It happened once in Ruairi's room. And it was because I rarely close doors in the house, and therefore all the bedroom doors would have been opened. And this particular day, you know, the lights, as I say, they would have come on randomly in Eoghan's room. Eoghan's room was actually, the door was closed for some reason. And when I got to the top of the stairs, the light in Ruairi's room was on. Now, it had come on randomly, and I say randomly because, you know, they were both at the top. Those two bedrooms were at the top of the stairs. So, you know, when it's dark at night time, you'd know if it was on from downstairs. So as I'm walking upstairs, suddenly there's a light. Was it them? Was it the electrics? Who knows? I choose to believe it was them, you know, and reminding me. And what happened, you know, when it would happen in Eoghan's room is I'd go in, I'd sit in there just quietly and talk to them. You know, white feathers became a thing for me. So there was that sense of if there was a white feather, it reminded me of the boys. You know, a robin reminds me of Eoghan and Ruairi. You know, if there happens to be two, well, then that's a definite sign. You know, they're the things that just make me, I suppose, they connect me to the boys, and that's important, you know.
I think absolutely you'd need that. What did you do with their belongings?
So I made a decision quite early on that I was not going to turn their rooms into shrines. Okay. I needed to be able to leave the house. I needed to be able to leave the house overnight. I needed to know that, you know, there was no sense that I was deserting them. You know, I've always said I bring them with me wherever I go. So while I didn't pack things up or get rid of things per se, it happened over time. You know, I slept in what was Rory's room, but that they had shared. Latterly, I slept in that for about 2 years. And, you know, I built myself up to this sort of, I've got to move back into, you know, I've got to think about moving back into my own room now. And I've got to, you know, all of this was going through my head. And I ended up going into my own room because everything was in there. You know, I used to go in there to dress and undress and that. So I happened to lie down on the bed for some reason. I don't know what I was doing. I was looking at something on the phone. I fell asleep and I woke up the next morning. So suddenly
you were in your own
I was in my own room again.
When you were sleeping in their bed, you know the way they say, like, you can smell the person, but then
it goes.
Smell goes.
It does, and it did, but it was gradual.
Yeah,
it wasn't something that happened. Sort of, I could smell them today and gone tomorrow. So it was a gradual thing, and you know, again, I knew instinctively I needed to work out a way that I was going to be able, as I say, to leave the house.
Yeah.
So for me, it was their teddy bears. So for a long time, every time I went anywhere, and if I was going away overnight, their teddies came with me. Now they don't anymore, but their teddy bears and one particular photograph of them. And I always felt that if I had those two things, I could go anywhere in the world, because actually I bring Eoghan and Ruairi with me, you know. So, you know, I've sold the family home since. I would have gotten a huge amount of comfort from being there in the early days for probably about 6-7 years at least. COVID.
Oh my God, Kathleen, I thought you were going to say a huge amount of money when you said we sell a house. I was thinking, that's very weird. It was my brain that was weird.
No, well, I did sell it at a good time, as it happened.
Isn't that good? Yeah. Before you said it, I was like, that's a bit, and then comfort, of course, bloody comfort, my goodness. Oh.
But it is. But you've also got to be practical, because I also knew I was buying another house.
Yes.
But I needed to downsize. I was at a point where there wasn't the comfort anymore from the house, and it was just frustrating. It was built as a family home and it needed a family, you know, and that wasn't something I was ever going to be providing for it. So I work in Dublin, so it made sense. So I've
were you commuting back and forth?
Yeah, and I would stay up. I used to stay with my cousin up here in Dublin for during the week. I worked 3.5 days. So 3 days in Dublin. So I wasn't here for 5 days a week. You know, it was a little easier, but still. And it felt like I was constantly on the road. I was now, you know, I never fully unpacked, if you like. So that was, it gets to a point where it's just wearing. Where you get weary of it. And so I made the decision to sell, and that's when things got tough, because that's where I had to make decisions on all of the boys' things. So lots of things had been given away, lots of the toys had been given away already, and I kind of kept what I, you know, what meant the most to me. But suddenly I was packing the house and I was having to get rid of things, and I was downsizing. So one of the examples I used was Eoghan had, in his room, he had made a robot out of cardboard boxes and cardboard tubes, things like that. And it was probably about 2-3 foot. And it was on his shelf and had been there for as long as. And it was a dust catcher, and it was probably something, if you touched it, was going to fall apart. But a decision had to be made. And that was one of the first things I made a decision on. And I looked at it and I thought about it. And did I get rid of it? Did I not? Did I keep it? If I kept it, then I was going to be keeping everything. And so I kind of went, okay, let it go. And then it was, well, did I take a photograph of it? Because that was suggested. No, I'm either keeping it or I'm not. So it was one of the first things to go into the skip. And it got easier after that. Okay. And I don't need physical things to remember Eoghan and Ruairi. A very good friend made an absolutely gorgeous blanket out of their jerseys, their sports jerseys. It's a patchwork blanket. She is just incredible. I have the blanket, I have their teddy bears, and I have my favourite photograph of them, and I can literally go anywhere in the world. The rest is there. So there are still things that I have. I have some of their school books, I have some of their clothes, I have some of their baby clothes that, most mums we all keep. And the little hats and little booties and, the blankets, I have a christening blanket, so those sorts of things are there. But I have to think, having packed, so I packed originally leaving the house and I went to a rental and then I had to pack again moving. So, I'm still in the process of going, and every time I go through things, because at the moment an awful lot of stuff is stored at my brother's in a loft in his place. And when I go through things, I inevitably get rid of some. It might not be a little bit, but I'll get rid of some of the again.
You leave a little trail behind you.
Exactly. My sister's gotten very good about saying yes when can you take that out? Yes. Yeah, I put it in my car and she'll get rid of it then. Okay, that's easier actually. That does make it easier. Yes. But I have a box of toys that were theirs, and I've given a lot of their toys away, but now I look at it and I go, now what am I going to do with them? What now? And because they're not, it's not like I can put them anywhere where I'm living now, because it's quite small in comparison. It was not as though it was stuff that was out on display down in my house in Carlow anyway. So decisions over the next while will have to be made as to what to do. It's not a huge amount of stuff, but it's their hurls and there's schlitters with their names on them or medals. So there's a few bits and pieces. I've whittled it down over time. But I always think with that, there's no rush. Don't make decisions, and don't ever make a decision to get rid of something that you might regret. I'm quite comfortable that as I'm doing it, it's the right thing to do now. So I've never felt, I wish I hadn't, or I shouldn't have done that. There's been nothing that I've looked back and gone, I should have kept that. Yeah. Which is quite good.
That is good. Do you still talk to Sandra's family? Do you have any kind of relationship with them, or how were they about the whole thing?
God love them. They, just in shock. Yeah. They live. His mum lives in the UK. He's got a brother in the Northern Ireland, and his sister's in Spain. So they're not close by. Okay. I suppose that maybe makes it a little bit easier in a way. They didn't do this. Mm-hmm. So they're equally in shock. And for his mom in particular, it's tough because she's grieving for the loss of her grandchildren, but also to a certain extent the loss of her son. This wasn't this wasn't how she reared him. This wasn't the boy that she brought up. Mm-hmm. I don't have a bad relationship with them. We're not close anymore. But, my brother-in-law was down at the book launch last week. So, so there is support there. Yeah. He and his sister have pretty much disowned Sanj. Okay. And and as far as they're concerned, they don't have a brother. His mom, I know, still speaks to him every maybe 3 or 4 weeks. He will phone her. And it's funny, as a mother, I get that. I actually, I have no issue with that whatsoever, because I think, you know, she will never condone what he did. She will never understand it. She will never support him, if you like, in what he did. But as a mother, he's still her son.
Is his father anything?
His father's passed away. His father passed away when I was pregnant with Ruairi. And it's funny, he would have, I think, had a closer relationship to his dad. And there's a part of me that questions, if his dad was still alive, would he have done this? I don't think he would. I'm not quite sure why I think that way, but I feel that, you know, he had a respect for his dad, that I think he would have. I just don't think he would have done it if his dad was alive. Yeah,
it's unbelievable to think it, though, isn't it?
It is. You know, you're trying to you're having conversations about things that just seem so bizarre and remote, and you know, and I can sometimes I feel that I sound quite removed, if you like.
No, you don't. You just sound so. You know, as it's lovely to hear you talk and smile whenever you talk about them. You actually just naturally, and maybe that's just the mum in you. And certainly I think the conversation has been more uplifting than it has been doom and gloom, which is, you know, but I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the work that you're currently doing for Ireland and people in Ireland, and even just people, like the whole family were all aware of the circumstances under which those poor people died as well. And so can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I suppose I've always felt that Eoghan and Ruairi had a very strong sense of justice, within them. So I feel in lots of ways that I am carrying that on, if you like. They knew right and wrong. And I look at a system, and it is a system. There's no person, there's no government minister, there's no, you know, this is a system that has evolved over years and years. And, you know, the reality is when it comes to particularly domestic homicide or familicide, you know, taking a family member, a parent taking the lives of their children, it is a complete anomaly. It's something that we find very difficult as human beings to understand. And I do feel very strongly that if I have a voice that I can use and that I feel strong enough to be able to use, then I should use it. I'm not shy about talking. I never was. So I suppose I look at this now and I go, right, what is it that I have learned? What has worked well in my circumstances? What hasn't? And how should, and part of this comes about from talking to other families. You know, you mentioned the whole family. There are many other families that I would know who have been through similar experiences to me. And what is it that can actually make a difference? Because when we talk, there's a lot of differences with our experience. Some have had reasonably or relatively positive experiences in the circumstances. Some have had horrendous experience. So it shouldn't be a lottery, if you like. You know, the experience with the guards or the experience with wasn't social services for me, but certainly within the community of Ballinkillen, the experience of the school, for example, you know, the NEP psychologist that came into the school at the time, you know, there was a huge support.
Little children would have had to have been spoken to,
so there's a huge amount of support there. Well, if that can come to school in Ballinkillen, it should come to every school and be available to every school. So that's where I feel there needs to be equity in this, and it needs to be, it doesn't matter where something like this happens in the country, there needs to be the support system.
So it's not about preventing it happening. No, because it's about helping it when it does.
When it does. And I think, you know, the prevention side of it, we'll never know what we've prevented. because it will not have happened.
Yeah.
So
I mean, in your case, it doesn't seem like anyone could have prevented anything because there was no signs.
Yeah.
So,
and that's the case in an awful lot of the families.
It's unreal though, because everyone thinks, you know, oh, she's going to come out with some gem and say, actually, there was this sign, I should have seen it. But
there's not.
Yeah.
There isn't. And that's hard. It's because there should be, you know, it should be something that's glaringly obvious, and it's not. And that's what makes it so much more difficult to think that we can prevent it. You know, I do a lot of work now with Safe Ireland. So, you know, an organisation involved in our tagline is making Ireland a safer place for women and children, you know, and so we work a lot with sort of the legislation around domestic abuse and domestic violence. And it sounds awful. They're the obvious ones, the obvious cases. But there's an awful lot of cases that we don't see. You know, I've talked umpteen times about the fact that I now know an awful lot about domestic violence. But would I spot it? Would I notice it? Would I recognise it within my own family or my own community? You know, I don't know. Statistically, in my workplace, there has to have been women that were being abused. But I wouldn't have seen it necessarily.
Able to pick it up.
So, you know, that's something that we have to learn. So people need to be able to be open, to be able to talk out without fear or fear of repercussions. My own little bugbear is, you know, and I understand that in some cases women and children have to flee their own home. But that is one of the things that really gets to me, because I go, why should they have to? Why can the perpetrator not be the one that's taken away? But that's, you know, that's ongoing work, if you like, in that field. So I do feel I have a voice and I need to use it. And I am doing it for me. I'm doing it for Eoghan and Ruairi, and I'm doing it in the hope that those that come after me, because there will be more cases, unfortunately. We see it on such a regular basis now in the news and in the media of women that have been murdered, children that have been murdered. Less so children, but they are happening. And what the support that's required there. So what is that support? Well, it's recognised, not brushing anything under the carpet. It's recognising what has happened and going, okay, what do you need? And it's actually saying, because what I need might be very different from what the next family needs, you know, but it's actually going, okay, what is needed in this case and what can help? Because I look back at my own, and I suppose I can only refer to myself, but, you know, there are certain, like, I still had a mortgage to pay. Okay. I know that Ulster Bank would have been very sympathetic and, you know, would have given me mortgage breaks if I needed it, but it would have had to be paid back regardless.
Oh my goodness, you never think about things like that.
So mortgage still had to be paid, bills still had to be paid. Again, everybody would have been very sympathetic and very understanding. But it still had to be paid.
Yeah.
And
did you have to pay the gambling debt as well?
No.
Okay.
No, they were very good that way. And took that burden, if you like, off me.
Yeah.
But those were the things that, you know, there's certain things. There was a few people actually said, well, no, sure, your mortgage would have been paid off. And I'm like, no,
he didn't die.
Well, he didn't die. You know, so mortgage insurance that cover didn't matter at that point. So there was, you know, so there's the practical things. You know, I was incredibly lucky in that my employers continued paying me. That meant that everything could continue. So I didn't have to worry about it. The psychologist, I was seeing him 3 times a week. There's a huge expense on that, but he was very supportive. I didn't. He took me on as a pro bono.
Some people are angels, aren't they?
Absolutely. And, you know, so I didn't have to worry about that. And we had numerous discussions about that in you know, as things kind of settled and that. And bless him, he came back and he said, no, Kathleen, it's for me to come back to you when that time comes, when it's, you know, so that helped. But, you know, there's still a cost.
Yeah.
And there's a cost for every single family. You know, my own family, you know, covered the cost of the funerals, you know, so I didn't have to bear that burden. And, you know, and the other side of that is suddenly, as time went on, not so much in the immediate because I just didn't care, but because Eoghan and Ruairi weren't there, Sanj wasn't there, I actually had more disposable income than I would have done beforehand, and that was tough actually, believe it or not, because suddenly you're going, no, I should be counting the pennies at the end of the month because there was school things coming up or sports. Well, I should have had more outgoings. In reference to the boys, but you said it's almost a guilt, if you like, which is really silly, but it happens. It's so it's for me. It's and I've talked a lot about if we put the victim and their families at the centre of the justice system, and we work from that, we will have a fair system, in my view. At the moment, it's the perpetrator that is at the centre, and the perpetrator's rights come before the rights of the victim.
Is that because they're innocent before proven guilty?
Yeah.
Is that
so?
Okay.
That you've got to make sure that they have a fair trial, effectively, and you want to, at all times, what's happening, in my view, is we're making sure that they don't have grounds to appeal anything. So, if you cross all of the I's and dot all of the T's, or the other way around, then the chances are they will see justice, if you like. But the victim and their families get forgotten in that process. Some of that is, again, when I
so they can get appeal.
So the fear is that if that there would be grounds in to either appeal a conviction, or that there would be a defence that could actually be made because something happened, because there was a piece of information shared that shouldn't have been shared, or that there was some knowledge that should or shouldn't have been brought to somebody else's attention. So for me, for example, I didn't know that Sanj had written letters. There was a lot of information that was kept from me until the trial, because if Sanj had put up a defence, then there would have been a full trial and I would have been called as a witness, and I couldn't have been tainted, if you like.
Okay, you could have been impartial if you'd seen letters that he'd written.
Yeah.
So, and how long has he been convicted for?
His conviction was from the 29th of July. So it was he was imprisoned straight away. Well, as soon as he was discharged from hospital, he was arrested and imprisoned within about 2 days.
Okay.
And so
for how long?
2 life sentences.
And does 2 life sentences mean in prison for the rest of your life?
No. So he will eventually be, he's eligible for parole. He has made 1 attempt at parole already. So at 7 years. So in Ireland, when he was convicted, you could apply for parole from 7 years onwards, or at 7 years. And that has changed. There is a new parole bill that was enacted. It was enacted only a year ago. But prior to that, he had made an application for parole at 7 years. Now, number one, the new law, as I understood it, was in place, and it was signed into law, the parole bill, where we moved from 7 years to 12 years. But because it hadn't been enacted, he was still in a position to make the application. I was really, really surprised he made the application. I just assumed that he would never apply for parole. Because of what he had done. I really didn't expect him to, but it's been an eye-opener for me. And I go, okay, we're now, he's not necessarily accepting his punishment, if you like. He is going to try to get out. So I have to prepare myself for that. His application wasn't heard because of COVID. There were delays. So it wasn't heard before the new parole bill was enacted, which basically meant he's now been pushed to the 12 years. So in 2 years' time, I'm expecting him to make an application again for parole. I know he won't get parole at that stage. I absolutely am quite confident he won't get it. But when it gets to 16, 17, 18 years, it's at that point that there will be consideration for possibly, some concessions. Will he possibly be moved to an open prison? That's always possible. And for the
time being, he's in a cell by himself, is he? Okay.
Yeah, he's in Arbor Hill, actually. Which he's there for his own protection, because he would be at risk if he was in some of the other prisons, because of what he has done. So he is, as has been described, he's among his own kind there. He's with his own ilk. It's a slightly, in my view, and this is only my own view, it's a softer prison. He's slightly protected. They're older, the prisoners in there. There's, he has a routine, as far as I understand, in there that, I don't know much about it, but, my understanding is that in Arbor Hill, it's probably a relatively easy kind of life, if you like, other than the fact that he simply can't leave.
Yeah.
But the average prison sentence in Ireland for life is 20 years prior to parole.
Do double life sentences run consecutively? Mm-hmm. So he's 40 years then?
No, sorry, concurrently.
Concurrently,
so no.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's one sentence effectively.
Oh, okay.
So, if he does 20, I would hope that he does somewhere in the region of about 25 years. That's what I feel is probably as good as it's going to get.
Would you like him to be there till death?
Forever. Okay. Yeah. He doesn't deserve to leave, in my view. He does not deserve to leave.
Do you wish he had died when he did try to kill himself?
Yeah, I do. I know, and people would have said, well, no, this way he gets to be punished. Well, actually, that punishment is punishment for me as well. So as an example, I had to go through divorce. I had to take a civil case against him. I was advised to take a civil case against him because he had a right to half the home. Legally it was in both our names. So legally he had a right to it if in a separation and divorce. So I took a civil case against him, knowing that I would never, I wasn't going to receive anything from it, even though, I think the headline in the newspapers was, I was awarded 80,000 or something like that. But that was...
What does a civil case mean? Was it
the trauma? For the trauma. So it was an unlawful death.
Okay. So you would get the home.
Yeah. So what happened with that was I took a case against him. There was an award made in my favour against him, so that in the event that he did challenge me for half of the value of the house, that actually I had an award against him already.
Okay.
So that would have been used against that. But even having to think through that sort of scenario was bizarre.
Yeah.
So, those are the sorts of things that you don't even think about.
So that's where the support comes in.
Yeah.
And where people need to know be their hands held.
Hands held. And again, the support that I got, and I got incredible support. But the support in those early days that I got in making sure that I didn't do anything, to myself, was from family and friends who were equally traumatized. Yeah,
because it's not just you; it's your wider, like your poor mum worrying about you.
That's it. So,
did they all receive counselling?
It was available to them if they wanted. Okay. Some did, some didn't.
Yeah.
So even within the wider community, the kids in school, they needed, because you had parents in shock trying to manage children who didn't really have a clue what was going on. Owen's friends were old enough to know something had happened. Rory's friends not so much in those early days, but they learned as they got older. So dealing with that. So, even the educational psychologists that came into the school, there was a number of years that they needed to be available and they needed to be there for the kids. So, and even still, when I meet Owen's friends in particular, I know that every time they see me, it triggers an emotion in them,
They must be like 20 now.
They're 20 now, yeah.
Big
so the
boys,
big boys, they're all tall. I generally come in somewhere between their belly button and their chest when I get it, because I get it
short. Petite.
Goods and small parcels.
Absolutely.
But they, so I get it, and I do get a big hug, which is just wonderful.
Do you feel sad when you see them? Like, do you?
You see, I don't.
Okay.
I don't actually feel sad. I suppose I feel a loss, yes, because the boy, you know, Eoghan and Ruairi should be part of this, or Eoghan should be playing, you know, in the senior hurling team at the moment. And, you know, the senior team in Ballinkillen this year, because it's coming up to 10 years, the 10-year anniversary, have chosen to put the boys on the back of the T-shirts. So, you know, they've got Teammates Forever, Eoghan and Ruairi. Oh. And, you know, you'd asked me before about what would I want to say to young people, you know, out there. And one of the concepts that got coined after the boys was Teammates Forever. And we have a hurling tournament in Ballinkillen every year called the Teammates Forever tournament. And I talk about, you know, teammates, and it's one of the things I would always say to kids, and it's why I love, while I'm not sporty myself, but I love children being involved in sport, is, you know, especially team sports, it is, you know, remember that you are a teammate and you have teammates. So be there for your friends if they need you in whatever way that might be, but also remember that when you need them, they're there for you. You know, and it's a simple enough concept, but you know, I saw it in Ballinkillen all the time, and I still see it down there. You know, and that's, you know, with young people, they need to reach out to have the confidence, even when you feel there's none there, to just talk to a friend. And if you've got a friend that has confided in you and you're not sure how to deal with it, talk to an adult. It doesn't have to be your mum or dad if you're not comfortable with that, but find somebody either in school or an aunt or uncle or somebody that will just listen. But it's up to us as the adults to listen.
And not just to brush it off.
And not to brush it off, you know. So you know, with the I mean, to see the jerseys, to see the love that Eoghan and Ruairi continue to inspire is phenomenal for me, you know. And it's like in the early days, I would have talked to my sister, to my brothers and their wives, and, you know, I've often said it's okay to give out about your own kids. It's okay to talk about your own children in front of me. They're not Eoghan and Ruairi.
Yeah.
So I'm not jealous. I'm not feeling like I've missed, you know, or I don't feel bitter about other people's children.
That's what I was going to ask you about your work.
Yeah.
Because I know that you work in an IVF clinic, which is obviously babies are born.
Yeah.
And did you ever, because I was thinking, oh my goodness, is that absolute masochism doing that to yourself? But no, you're saying no. And
it's not. I would say actually my work probably has helped me in a way. Okay. So having, I suppose, counselled women and couples about loss, you know, albeit very early, over the years probably gave me a little bit of an insight. But it also gave me the insight of not being bitter, because if I was bitter and angry and upset and didn't want to be around children, you know, I look at my own nieces and nephews and I see the joy and feel the joy that they bring me. And if I didn't want to be around them, and I was making it difficult for them to be around me, they'd avoid me. Their lives would go on absolutely fine. There wouldn't be, you know, I'd be sort of, you know, old Auntie Kathleen in a corner somewhere. I'd be, you know, sort of this character that they just have to be quiet around or whatever. But I'd lose. I'd be the one. They wouldn't. They'd just get on with their lives. But I would lose that love, that the hugs, the kisses, the I love yous, you know, and that's the only time I allow anybody to put the head to the side with that, you know, that, but you do get a little bit, you know, I mean, the times that I would have had, you know, that I might have been crying about something and, you miss Eoghan and Ruairi, don't you, Auntie Kathleen? I said, yeah, no, I do miss them. I know. I miss them too sometimes. And then they're gone. Yeah. You know, and that's what kids bring you sort of back into the moment. So I've always felt if I had to work at that relationship, it was important that I have a relationship with them. But I was the one that was going to have to do the work in that. You know, these are children. And even with as I say, friends and family, you know, please be normal around me, you know. And that was the discussion. It was like, please, it is okay to turn around to me and go, I could kill him. I know that's not what you're going to do.
Okay, yeah, I never
it's
thought
words.
Of that. Yes, of course.
You know, and there are words.
You did say humour was so important.
Oh,
you did say that to me before we started the podcast.
Yes, and that's, you know, that's something that I use quite a lot. Sometimes I feel I've got quite a dark sense of humour at times, but that has nothing to do with what happened. That was there anyway. But it is, you know, I have to. Your children are not my children.
Yeah.
You know, you haven't taken something from me, if you like. I know who took it. I know who's responsible. And if you try to treat me with kid gloves, it's a bit different now, but in the early days, if you treat me with kid gloves, you're actually sort of, you're boxing me away in somewhere else. You're removing me from this. You're putting barriers around me, and I didn't want that. I cared about your children just as much now, or care about them just as much now as I did when I had Eoghan and Ruairi. You know, I was as interested in them then as I am now. You know, don't treat me differently. And that was very important in the early days. I like to think at this stage that it is normal.
Yeah.
You know, no question about it. I bribe my nieces and nephews.
I was going to say, are you the one with the money?
Oh yeah, pretty much.
Oh, that disposable income you're talking about.
That's it, and it gets spent on them. You know, and you know, I mean, I used to laugh at they'd be coming off, the kids would be coming off with me. Maybe we'd go to cinema or we'd be doing something, and say, "Now, you're not to ask Auntie Kathleen for anything." You know, and I'm like, well, I might be up to Auntie Kathleen.
Yeah.
But you know, I'll indulge them.
Yeah, of course.
It's not all the time. It's nothing major.
No.
It's a book, or it's a toy, or it's a, you know.
So that's what us aunties are there for, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, it's like grandparents. They're to indulge, isn't that right?
And that's what I do. But I also know, I know what I get from that, and I know what I get from, you know, from the youngest to the oldest. You know, the two older girls are over in Australia, so I don't get the same, I suppose, on a regular basis. But you know, from Kieran, who's 15, he was there was only a few months between himself and Ruairi. You know, and Sarah, they're both 15, right down to Evelyn, who is 6. Okay. You know, and you know, kids are what they are. You know, they're spontaneous, they're in the moment, and they
level you as well, don't they?
They bring you back down to earth, absolutely. But they lift you. 100%. You know, and they are my joy. There's no doubt. They, you know, as I keep saying, you know, to their parents, I'll hold my will over them, over in the years to come, and you know, I keep saying I'm indulging my passion for nice handbags.
Lovely.
Yeah, for my goddaughters.
I love it.
I'm investing for them.
Absolutely.
I'm investing for them.
That, you know, that Versace handbag is for her now. It's not for myself.
Not for myself.
Kathleen, what hopes do you have for your future? Would you like to find another partner?
Yes, I would. There's been a couple of false starts on that score. That would take a whole other podcast, Laura. Whole other podcast. That's dating in your late 40s and 50s is very different to your mid 20s, which is the last time I would have dated. I met Sanj at 26.
Yeah. I think it's different now anyway, with all the apps and stuff. I don't think, but I get it. Like in your late 40s, early 50s, it's tough. It's just different. Yeah. And in fairness, I'm not going to be easy either. There's a certain amount of baggage that comes with me. Someone like Googles your name. Yeah. Oh, damn.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you ever think of changing your name?
No, actually, I kept it as Chada for Eoghan and Ruairi. So that connection to them.
Yeah, I thought that was
and it. There's a lot of things. I often talk about not wanting to cut off my nose to spite my face. I have to remember we were happy and we were a family. I can't whitewash Sanj out of our lives, because if I do that, then I'll whitewash a lot of Eoghan and Ruairi. So, you know, I struggle to find a photograph of me with just the boys. I had lots of Sanj with the boys, but not so many of me with the boys.
That's typical bloody mother, isn't it?
That's exactly.
You're taking all the photographs.
Yeah. And I liked to be on the other side of the camera, the usual thing, you know. So, you know, that was a bit of a struggle. So sort of hopes for the future are I suppose, I want to see change in the justice system. One of the things that I spoke to Simon Harris about today was, you know, the introduction of minimum sentencing at the time that a sentence is passed, that the judge can say to serve a minimum of X number of years prior to consideration for parole.
That doesn't happen now.
Doesn't happen now. It happens in the UK, but it doesn't happen here. It happens in other countries as well. So that's something that they are seriously looking at. And it was really, really good to hear that today, I have to say. You know, that it's not just a vague concept, that actually there is real work being looked at in that. So from the campaigning and that kind of work, that's my ultimate goal. That's what I would like to, because that's the one thing that would have made a big difference to me. The parole bill, when that was introduced, was part of that, was a difference, but this would make a big difference. So on a personal level, you know, I'm working, I'm enjoying work. I'm starting a new job with another fertility clinic, first IVF in the next couple of weeks, and I'm getting back into a little bit more clinical work than I would have done. I've kind of been office space for a while, so that brings its challenges, because, you know, from an emotional perspective, you know, you get quite invested with couples and with patients, and so that's going to, as I say, bring some challenges. But I'm looking forward to that, and getting, every time I would have had some interaction with clients or patients, I would have always, you get a buzz from it. You do get a buzz. So to meet somebody else, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to. I don't feel that I'm a solitary person in that way.
It's very clear you're not. You're as chatty and as
that's it.
And as, you know, lovely to be with as anyone.
But I'm also, I suppose, a little bit more wary, and I'm wary in a way, and it's not about trusting somebody else, to be honest. It's more about trusting my own judgment of somebody else. So can I trust myself? Can I trust my judgment? And that comes in both intimate relationships and, you know, all relationships. You know, that got shaken 10 years ago. And, you know, who can I trust? If I can't trust the person that I loved most in the world, who can I trust? So there's a lot of work that has to happen when I'm meeting new people, just in my head, that I kind of go through. And you know, so trusting my own instincts is something I've had to do a lot of work on. And
because I suppose you'd be second guessing.
You second guess everything, yeah, you do. So, you know, that makes it maybe a little bit more difficult when it comes to relationships and that going forward. I had to think, because of the nature of what I do work-wise, you know, within a few months of the boys' death, I had to consider whether I wanted to have more children. I was 42 when they were killed. I turned 43 within a few months. So I remember going and sitting down with the psychologist and talking about, did I want to consider having fertility treatment as a single woman? And I gave myself a year to think about it, because I knew my age was against me. I knew it was something that I had to think about sooner rather than later. And I went, so I did. I took probably about 6 months to kind of consider it and mull it over and think it through, and made the decision, no, that wasn't, you know, I wanted my family back. Absolutely. I wanted my family. I didn't want a child for the sake of a child. You know, I was a mum, so I was lucky enough to have had 2 beautiful, healthy, gorgeous kids. I didn't need to go down the route of fertility treatment on my own to be a mum. I was already a mum. So I suppose that was part of it. And I kind of felt, if I did meet somebody in, you know, those few years, then there were other options for me. You know, I worked on an egg donation program, so I knew that was an option for a number of years if I really wanted to.
Yeah.
Again, either in a relationship or as a single woman. But it's never been something that I, you know, if I had met somebody maybe 5 years ago, you know, in my sort of mid to late 40s, and it was something that, you know, we both decided, I would have considered it, absolutely. But, you know, that ship has sailed now.
Yeah.
You know, and it's not something that I regret. I don't look back on it and wish it different. If it had happened, fine. But it's, you know, it didn't. And for whatever reason, and that's okay. But yeah, no, yeah. As I say, it's a whole other podcast.
It is. So I think that brings us naturally to, you've already answered the question about what would you tell young people today. So I think the only question that I have for you is, what is the meaning of life?
For me, the meaning of life is family. That is, so I am very connected to my family. I'm very close to my family, and the meaning of my life is family. And that goes from my parents, my siblings, their partners, my nieces and nephews, and then to the wider family, you know, which is my aunts and uncles and my cousins, and those relationships. And then I see as family some of my close friends as well, you know, the community. So it's surrounding yourself with good people that can be there for you and support you, and that you can be there for and support when they need it. And ultimately, the meaning of life for me is Eoghan and Ruairi. You know, they made me a mum, and that can never be taken away. You know, and I've been asked, do I regret meeting Sanj? No, because I had two beautiful boys because I met him. So I can't regret that. I can't, as I say, whitewash him out of my life, because he was a big part of my life. So, you know, the biggest part of my life and the biggest meaning in my life now is Eoghan and Ruairi. And they are part of my family.
Absolutely. And your book is called Everything.
It is indeed.
Because I assume it's because they're your everything.
They were and are my everything, and everything was taken away from me, and I will never get everything back again. But I'll keep trying to get close to that, you know, in whatever way I can.
Kathleen, you have been an amazing guest, and thank you so very much for giving me the time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.